Hello, everybody. We'll give a couple more seconds for people to file in. I'll give it until just after 1 minute. How about that? Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. So hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our webinar today on fostering effective communication in the modern workplace. Very excited to have Dr. Jay Pugh here. He's the Vice President of the Center of Leadership and Development at New Horizons. And he's going to be discussing with us how to successfully improve communication, foster connections, increase productivity, and just really help develop highly successful teams. And before we begin, please note there's a Q&A and a comment section on your Zoom dashboard. Please make use of those. We encourage you to ask questions. If we don't get to them immediately, we will definitely address them in a Q&A. We'll leave a few minutes after the presentation. We'll also be sending you a recording of this webinar via email, so keep an eye on your inbox. And with that being said, welcome, Dr. Pugh, and take it away.
I appreciate it, Tiffany. Thank you so much for having me. And I want to welcome everybody to Fostering Better Dialogue in a Modern Workforce. Just a little bit about me and sort of what we do. I've dedicated a lot of space towards this remote management space. I know we're running into that a lot, the hybrid workforce, this new modern workforce. I've dedicated kind of the last decade to this, and I feel like this is such a critical component in what we're trying to achieve, is really understanding what pain points are we finding, what needs are we finding, what research is behind there. And so I'm just so glad you can join me. I do have a PhD in instructional management and leadership from Robert Morris. I've been in this space for about 15 years. I'm a published author in the space of remote engagement. I am a hashtag girl dad. I got 4 daughters. 2 are adopted, 2 are biological. And so other than teaching this, that's my main passion. And so getting to know you all a little bit, I want to kind of ask sort of this opening question and really gain some understanding. So if you can help me, what do you think some benefits or roadblocks exist for working in either a hybrid workforce or a virtual workforce? What do you think those roadblocks or benefits look like? Feel free to type those responses in the chat. I'd love to see what we come up with. What benefits, what roadblocks? What benefits and what roadblocks? Let's see what we got coming up. Go for it, Courtney.
I just want to let you know that on my end, it says the chat is disabled.
Oh, okay. So then we can do the Q&A if we want, and go ahead. And if you want to type it in the Q&A section, that sounds perfect. I appreciate you letting me know.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So let's see what we got coming in. We can type it in the question and answer. Oh, we should be able to chat now. Thank you for that, Tiffany. So we could either use the chat or we can be able to use the question and answer panel, whatever's easier for you. What benefits, what roadblocks do we find? Less commute, I'm seeing. Mandy, I love this. This is less commute, less get ready time, more energy to focus on work. You get a quieter workspace at home, not what we call the drive-bys, right? I would agree with that entirely. I love this. Dana, you're right. There's sort of this essence of better work-life balance. If there is a need, we don't have to leave our work to go ahead and take care of this. I'm seeing time management, Margaret. I love this. Kelly brings up a really good point, is that sometimes it's difficult to build high-performing teams. We have a course called Managing Remote and Virtual Teams that actually dives into how do we form, how do we create better storming measures, how do we build better norms in what we're doing, and how do we build high-performing teams? So I love that as a piece of bringing that into this. Brian mentions versatility, autonomy, trust. You do get a little bit more freedom. The challenge is that sometimes there can be an abuse of privilege, right? I think, Ulysses, you mentioned this understanding of distractions. Yeah, sometimes life sort of gets muddy between the work and the life balance. So that can be a benefit and a roadblock. I'm seeing things from Liliana like flexibility, focus, roadblocks. Courtney mentions less face-to-face interaction, less connectivity at times. That's going to be a big point we're going to dive into in just a moment. I'm also seeing Linda mentioning greater flexibility for balancing life and work, greater employee engagement and loyalty. It is a selling point right now for organizations to say, hey, you don't have to come into the office 5 days a week. That is a current trend we're finding. Maria mentions travel expenses, commute. It might not be as conducive in dialogue. We're going to talk about why that is, Maria, and I really love where we're going for this. Zara mentions body language is roadblocking. I would agree with that entirely. Team connection, that's another piece that we do. I think that these are things that we want to focus our attention to. High performance, trust, quality of life. And sometimes Kelly brings up a key point is that there is work-life balance, but sometimes the water is so muddy that we don't know where to end. So these are all really clear things. And I want to take some of these components and drill these down into a few major ideas. I love this feedback that you've already given. Keep that up. I love it. So the first thing that comes in is number one, we're finding that remote teams really aren't running into impact on work if there's not an abuse of privilege. So I really love where that's coming into play. I really love that that was discussed by Brian, that if there isn't an abuse of privilege, what ends up happening is that we sort of give a little bit more trust. We give a little bit more freedom. There's a little bit more understanding that we're not caught in this space of micromanagement as much. These are all great points. There are a couple challenges. The number one challenge that comes into play is the establishment of boundaries. That is a key thing. Because what happens before is we had commute time. We had time to separate and leave the office. And now when that doesn't exist anymore, what we've run into is this space or this place is saying, I don't know when work ends and life begins. So the ability to set meaningful boundaries and be transparent about those boundaries are absolutely critical. The second challenge that Courtney mentions, that I believe that, if I wasn't mistaken, Ulysses mentions, was getting to this space of it's less connective. And part of the reason why this is because of out of sight, out of mind mentality. It is out of sight, out of mind. And so what happens is that before, when we ran into things like interruptions, people would drive by and say, hey, how was your weekend? What you do? What you get taken care of? And it interrupted stream of consciousness. The challenge now, though, is because things are so out of sight, sometimes they're out of our mind. So the question becomes, when's the last time we checked in with employees? When's the last time we made sure they were all right? When's the last time we just caught up to catch up? When's the last time that we had a dialogue that wasn't just work related? So these are going to be things. The third piece of this that gets discussed is technological capabilities. Sometimes if people don't have access to cameras, or they don't have the confidence or the efficacy to use a remote platform, then all of a sudden that becomes a challenge, and there's a little bit more hesitancy. So all of these factors sort of create a little bit of disconnect in the way that we work. And so one component that I want to get to in a model of working better in teams is as follows. And I want to give a little bit of history behind this as we go through. Number one, I want you to think that, and if you can, if you want to just give me a thumbs up or a quick yes in the chat, how many of you were thrust into this remote environment a little bit? You were thrust into it, meaning that pandemic caused it, or do you know what? We had to keep up with the times, so we were kind of forced into it and we didn't get time to just garner this. I love the hand raise. Good. Yeah, if you want to use a hand raiser or yes, that's perfect. Quite a few. Look at this. So this is what happens, and I'm going to give you the psychological construct and went into this. So as we go through this, what ended up happening was we were in the workspace together. It was very connective. We met people, we saw people, and we had what was known as relationship management. Well, what ended up happening was we got away from it because we were thrust into COVID pandemic and everything flipped on its axis, and all that mattered was GSD. Anybody know what GSD stands for? And we can maybe get a PG version in there if you're already laughing. It is known as get stuff done. There it is. You got Robert, my man. I like it. Yeah. Getting stuff done. It is. It's getting stuff done. And because we went into get stuff done mode, what ended up happening was we lost time to build relationship management. And we got to get back to that, especially in the hybrid workforce, the remote workforce. We got to get back to that a little bit more. So the first thing that I pay attention to is relationship management. That has to be reestablished. What this looks like on a conceptual point is don't ask what people are doing, ask people how they're doing. I think we have a tendency to dive right into business, and that's because we were thrust into it in survival mode. And now that we're sort of scaling that back a little bit, we got to get back to how are you, not what are you doing. That's what I also call checking in, not checking up, right? I'm checking in just to see how you're doing, see what you might need, see how we can be supportive. Those are things that are critical in this environment. The other thing that I love to get into, and this is the Dr. J stamp of approval, if you will, is I focus on really being intentional about learning others' VIPs. In relationship management, the way that I view this is V's stand for values, I stand for interests, and P stand for preferences. And this is a key thing in getting to know what makes your people tick and click. So I'll give a few examples as we go through values and interests and preferences. The first piece when it comes to values is what do people value as a whole, as a human being? And I'll give you some examples. There are some people that value catching up and asking people about their weekend. By a show of hands, how many of you would say that you are that person? You love to catch up with people. You love to, hey, how was your weekend? What did you do? What did you do? Right? How many of you are in that space? Feel free to raise those hands up. Excellent. Yep. So we're seeing a good probably, okay, we're seeing a good 10 to 12 there so far. Excellent. I love the always there, Melissa. Perfect. So quite a few. How many of you are more in a space of saying, I'd rather not get into, I value my time. I'd rather not have the pleasantries. Look at this. We have a different sector of people. And sometimes it is both, right, Denise? Because it could be based on, well, how many of you would say you're both? It really depends on how much time do I have to communicate. If I'm busy, I can't get into it. There we go. So what happens is when we get into this, we have a tendency that sometimes, you know, and I'll give you an example, right? It's relative to time. I love that. What I always get into is this. There are people in the world that prefer GSD mode. They prefer to get stuff done. They prefer to get movement. And there are others that get into more of this space of, I want to slow things down and spend time with you. There are people that want to save time. There are people that want to make time. Other values that come into play are things like, do you value, ready for this? Because there's normally a priority. I guarantee you the answer is going to be all three of these. But there are people that value, do you prioritize integrity, intention, which is kindness, empathy, or competence? Because sometimes some push needs to come to shove, right? And there's some things that have to prioritize. And Robert, you're exactly right. Building that relationship up front can save you time on the back end. So that's a key question I like to ask people is, for me, I will tell you, I like kindness. I really do. But I am driven in a space of integrity. That is one that I prioritize more than anything else. Moral ethos, if you will. That's something I truly stand for. Sometimes that means that a feeling may need to get hurt. And sometimes it means that competence alone doesn't do it justice. Does that make me right and others wrong? Absolutely not. There are people on my team that value kindness, intention, empathy, support. That is their number one priority. They're driven more in their pathos than anything else. Care, emotional intelligence, kindness. That's okay. So for me, when I look at that value piece, I look at, are they driven by what's important to them? Is it competence, which is logic, accuracy, evidence? Is it driven in true logic? So you got to look at people and see what they value first. What do they prioritize first? And we got to ask people. We got to be more comfortable with asking people. That's the V's. The I's is interest. What are the things that get them to talk and speak up a little bit more? So I'll give you an example. I love my girls with every fiber of my being. I have 4 daughters. I love all of them so much I can't stand it. But every time a dialogue begins and I'm supporting 45 salespeople and 11 facilitators, the first question, anybody know what I get asked? How are the girls? Well, when you get asked that about 45 times, you start to get to a point where your answer becomes, there's a lot of them. What can I help you with? And sometimes, it's the dynamic of interest. Now, here's the thing. Will I talk sports with people? Sure. Like I said, I'm from Pittsburgh. You're born and raised in Pittsburgh. Guess what that means? You got to be a Steelers fan. Feel free to put your boos in the chats or the questions if you'd like. No worries. I completely understand. Some people like to talk art or music. They like to talk about different things. So find what their interest is. Find what their genuine interest is. That's going to make a significant difference in what gets them to move as a human. The last one is my absolute favorite, and that's preferences. And I want you to think of this in a couple contexts. Ready for this? Has anybody ever heard of peak times and weak times? Peak times and weak times. Give me a hands up if you know what that is. Peak times, or you can type it in the chat if you'd like. Peak times and weak times. Excellent, excellent. So what I love about, if not, put a no in the chat and be like, no, I'm interested in knowing what this is. Talk to me, Dr. J. What is this? Love this. All right. As the great Kevin Hart once so eloquently stated, y'all are going to learn today. It's going to be fun. Ready for this? Excellent. Loving the energy with it too. So what we get into is, how many of you are first thing in the morning people that if you want to meet with me before 9, meet with me first thing in the morning? How many of you, that is a preference of yours? You are the first things in the morning kind of people. And I love this, is that you have people coming in and saying right out the gate, no, thank you. No, thank you. I would prefer not to have that. And Melissa goes, heck yeah, I would. That sounds perfect. This is your peak times and weak times, folks. This is what we're getting into. So you have people on your team, whether you realize it or not, that their peak time is first thing in the morning. Kim and I would be best friends because we'd have a 7:30 meeting and it'd be a-okay, and then we can get on with the rest of our day. Right, Kim? Did we just become best friends? Yep. But if I tried that with Kelly and I'm not being mindful of that, she may have a different work-life balance. She may have different priorities. She may have different components coming into play. So we have to really understand what people's peak times and weak times are. I'll continue this conversation by a show of hands. How many of you are in the space of, don't talk to me till I get my coffee? Let me get to that 9, 10, even 11 a.m. time. There we go. Right. I love that. That's fair. That's fair, Denise. I love it, right? Please no meeting before Good, Javier. At least 2 cups, Karen. These are preferences, folks, and we got away from that. We got away from understanding when and why and how people move. And we got to get back to those VIPs in relationship management. And I like Ulysses, love to talk all day, right? All day, every day. It's connective, right? We're going to talk about what that social battery is. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. So the other thing that we get into is how many of you sort of catch your stride in the afternoon? You maybe get through all your busy work. You sort of get through this piece of like, hey, I got through all this. Now I have room and openness to sort of get to what I need to. Who are my afternooners? Very good. Very good. Excellent. So here's a challenge that we run into. And Kelly, you remind me of somebody. I love this. I have an account manager that I've worked with for years. I will tell you that if I need something from him, I don't think I've ever reached out to him before noon. I will delay my email sends until after 12. I will wait until the afternoon as long as there's not a sense of urgency. And Ulysses, right? That might be the weak time is, look, I got food in my belly. I need to catch my second or third wind. Maybe the after lunch effect kicks in. That's peak time. That's weak time. That's what we have to understand. We have to know it for ourselves. And then we have to look at the other and see when they thrive. That's what we want to see, Mandy. Yes, 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 yes. That's perfect. My peak time, and Mandy, I guarantee you and I are going to be best friends when I say this. If I sent you a meeting invite for 4 p.m., how would that go? No, thanks. Decline. Please don't. I am very, very much that way as well. That's right. And Kelly, right? That's when we talk about peak times and weak times. Now, how many of you really like to have a later day meeting if you need to because you feel that that's at your freshest? Yeah, there might be the Friday after 3. There's no meetings Friday after 3. Could be very well be the case. We have different times that we are at our best. And the more that you get to know, I mean this, the more that you get to know each individual's VIPs, the better relationships you will build, the more engagement you will find with them, the more that they will go out of their way to meet you where you are. And John, right? John's a GSDer like me, right? Respect John's time. That's a value, right? That's a value. Whereas other people like, and I would say closer to maybe, getting to Melissa, and Ulysses, they're like, no, it's people first, then we can get to work. That's a value. That's what we have to understand here. And we got away from that in this new workforce. Once we know those things, folks, then we can start getting to the space of support, which is based on 2 things. Number 1 is effectiveness of the communication platform. And 2 is the preference of that communication platform. So I'll give an example. I had somebody that used to IM me messages all the time, right? And what ended up happening was they were not very effective. They would prefer that mode of communication, but they weren't very effective. So what we had to do was find a better mode of support or communication if we were going to do that. The rule of thumb is you find the support between you and that other individual that creates the most effective, yet the most beneficial preference in the way you communicate. So with Mike, as we talked about, Mike and I are very much, I am quick, pick up the phone. More normally it's, are you free? That's the best way of communication we have. Do I prefer it? No, but I know that's creating the most effectiveness in that dialogue. For other people, it's driven much more in the space of, I share my calendar with everybody. If you need a spot, I'm there. Pick a spot, I will accept. This is where you have to understand the support management first, because sometimes you might send somebody a Teams message. They might not get back to you an hour from now, but if you just picked up the phone and called them, they would get to it. You have to understand what that support looks like in that communication management. Then the last one is, once you get those two things done, you can start setting better timelines, start creating better constructs in, okay, this person takes X amount of time to do this. I need to leave more leeway, or, hey, this person moves quicker. I need to make sure I keep up the speed with them in the communication and the movement. Does that make sense to everybody? If it does, do me a favor, hit the hand raiser, put yes in the chat. How many of you learned something of value right out the gate? Wonderful. Wonderful. Excellent. Perfect. Perfect. Love seeing that. So then that leads me to another question that I want to hop into. When you have virtual meetings, virtual dialogues, are they truly engaged? How can you tell? How do you make sure you have commitment and not compliance in those meetings? Are they truly engaged? So we ask questions, let everyone talk on the agenda, Samantha. I love that idea. We request everyone to be on. We're going to talk about that too, Denise. I really like that. Active participation and feedback. That's how we can tell when they are. Setting goals, objectives, follow-ups. That's the true intention of engaging. I love this. Occasionally, there might be the call on randomly. There's a few things that I want to dive into that I think are going to be pretty important. And what I like to get into is, and it could be, right? I love that. Entice a simple question answer. You do have to, Mandy, you do have to embrace opinions. Are we creating an open forum? We can see it if they are on camera, Zara. Yeah, that are they non-verbally delivering on that? Ask questions that require more yes and no's. At least get something to elicit response. Love this overall. I want to share a couple of things that, yeah, the praise. I really like that, Ulysses, right? Huge. This is going to be why I like to bring this up as a dialogue component. One thing that I've truly focused on in preparation for any dialogue, this could be a facilitation, it could be a meeting. And you're right, Robert, they do. So how do we stop this? How do we stop the zoning out? We're going to get into that right now. When we prepare for these meetings, the first thing that I want to stress is I don't prepare one way. I follow what I've built, or what I've built and what I follow pretty routinely is what is known as the CYA model of preparation. Now, once again, if you're already laughing, you're my kind of people. CYA doesn't quite stand for that. Although, you know what? It does kind of do that. It does cover your assets, if you will. Whenever I prepare, I really get into a space of, number one, we have to prepare our content. That is clear as a bell. We have to share that preparation of content. Who's responsible for that content? We have to open that up and make sure that that is open to everybody. However, I'm going to ask you all a question. How many of you all are enjoying the first 30 minutes of this right out the gate? Thumbs up if you are. You're getting some enjoyment out of it. Love it. Love it. Perfect. The content's on point. Good. Ready for this? So if I delivered like this for the next 30 minutes, you all would be on point, right? Because the content is the content is the content, right? Bueller. No? How many of you already had the urge to multitask? Melissa, you bring up a key point. You have to know the second piece of CYA is knowing yourself. It's knowing what it is about you that delivers a message for others. You have to know what qualities you exhibit. What I love that what Ulysses said was, I'm a social person. I want you to own that characteristic in your approaches, right? That's what we have to focus attention to. If you're somebody that's funny, Own the humor. If you're somebody that's compassionate, own that compassion. For me, knowing myself comes down to 4 qualities, and I call it peak. For me, no matter what dialogue I'm going to walk into, there's going to be 4 pieces that come in. Number 1, there's going to be a heavy amount of passion. Number 2, there's going to be engagement in the form of discovery-driven questions. Number 3 is it's going to feel authentic. It's not going to feel like we're just having a meeting to have a meeting. It's going to be authentic. It's going to have a real need. It's going to be human-driven. And you're right, Nancy, about that too, is that you can close everything else for a little bit to create that intentionality in your engagement with others. And the last one is kindness. I always demonstrate a level of grace in communication. If there's something not understood, I want you to tell me. If there's something that you feel is wrong, I want you to tell me. I want you to be blunt about it. I don't want you to sugarcoat. I want you to be candid. And that's Robert. That is absolutely, I love the way you said that. And Robert shared that with the hosts and panelists. If you don't mind, Robert, I want to share that with the group. But he said, I'm loud, gregarious, and outspoken, which works for some people. And with others, it might not be their style. And that is perfect. You have to know yourself first. That is brilliant. And then what it comes down to is, then we have to adapt to the audience. The audience is the third piece here, right? So when I prepare for audience, I'm paying attention to, once again, their VIPs. I'm paying attention to what they value, what their interests are, what their preferences are. I pay attention to how they prefer to communicate. And then I try to see if we can ramp that up a little bit. If they prefer chat, can we allow for response times to be quicker, just like we're using here? This is a webinar platform, so I don't get to see all of you. Would I prefer that I do? 100%. Don't get that capability here. So now we go to response time. That's the things that we have to understand, is how we're adapting to our audiences. How are we shifting to those audiences in that approach? So I know that if I'm passionate, I'm engaging, and I'm working with somebody that is much more compassionate, I might need to shift that back a little bit. I might have to scale back the volume in my voice, or the softness of my register. I might have to shift that. Now, one of the last things that I want to kind of share with you over the next 10 to 15 minutes is, how do we sort of build a better environment for engagement? Number 1, I want to talk to you about the 4 square of preparing content. I am a huge fan, and brace yourself, because I know there's probably going to be some laugh emojis coming in here, or a groan emoji or two. I'm okay with either here. Ready for this? The first piece of preparing meaningful content is what is known as analysis. It's your substance. It's your ability to know and say, do you know what? I have to bring in data, trends, analysis. I have to have all of that. It is your meat and potatoes. And the reason why we have to have that is because there are people out here who are the Lil Johns of the world. Anybody know why they're Lil John? Because they turn down for what? It matters to them. It does. It matters to them. What do we know? What do we need to know? What has occurred? What past history is exhibited? What do we need to do now? They have to move into that space. They are known as what thinkers. They are what thinkers. So we have to have analysis and substance built into our meeting. Normally, we're pretty good at that. The second piece of this, though, and how many of you would say you are truly analysis people? You love good numbers. You love good data. You might be my Lil Johns. There we go. Good. They're out there. They exist. Perfect. Very good. How many of you, now clearing the hands for a minute, how many of you are kind of like, analysis is good, isn't really where I want to be. It's not really what gets me going in meetings. Very good, Melissa. Excellent. We appreciate it. Not number 1. Perfect. Perfect. Kim, same thing. Love it. Now, ready? Some people, they are big picture. They are elaboration, synthesis. They need to know the greater why. They are your Backstreet Boys, ladies and gentlemen. You know why? You got to tell me why. Ain't nothing but a heartache. You got to tell me why. If you don't tell me why, I ain't moving. And you have people on your team that are absolute Backstreet Boys. If they don't know the greater why, they won't participate. They will think it's just for the sake of compliance. So we have to build in that greater why into the meeting. We have to build in that greater component. The best way to do this is to ask them the greater why. And Kim, right? You're like, yes, that's me. That's what we have to get into. So that's excellent, Robert. So that's why when we bring that up, sometimes I won't even give you the why. I will ask you the why. Anybody notice what the first thing I led with today's webinar was? Questions. Because it will elicit a deeper, more meaningful, big picture response. And that's huge, Liliana. That's good to know. That's why we want to make sure. So I build in questions that get them to answer the bigger why. That's known as metacognition. I ask people questions to get them to think about the way they're thinking. So while yes and no's are good questions, I also like to ask them questions to really get them to think about why something is the way that it is. Now, how many of you are like, hey, Dr. J, still haven't hit me yet, bud. When are we getting to me? Ready? This might be you next. Some people are not just sold on the analysis, and they're not just sold on the greater why. They need the bridge. They need to know the process, the procedure, the 1s, 2s, and 3s, the nuts and bolts. They are big on reliability and consistency. And so if that's the case, they, ladies and gentlemen, are probably one of the greatest one-hit wonders on the planet, Montel Jordan. Anybody know why? You know what they need to know? I really hope who knows Montel Jordan. Please tell me you know Montel Jordan. This is how we do it. This is how we do it. They need to know how we move from point A to point to point. There it is. I guarantee you, how many of you were singing it in your head? I knew it was there. Yep. We move from point A to point B. They need to know that they can't move from point A until they get, or they can't move to point C before they hit point B. They need to know this, that, then this. They need if-then statements. If we do this, then this will happen. We need to bring in more procedure into dialogue. If we do this, then we have this. If we bring this, then we have that. We need to build in more if-thens with them. And Margaret, I love it. That's where Margaret's like, that's my bread and butter. That's what we need to know. And you're noticing, and many of you are right. Do we have all 4 of these? We absolutely do. There's some that we crave a little bit more than others. There's some that we crave a little bit more. I myself, folks, I'm a Montel Jordan. I'm like Margaret. I need to know what is first, what is second, what is third, how do we proceed? That's going to be a lot where my questions are. If you're meeting with me, that's what I need to know. So we need all of these. And the funny thing is I guarantee you our meetings have fragments of these structured around, but how many of us are diligent and intentional in our preparation with it? How many of you are probably thinking maybe not as much as what I should be? And that's okay if that's the answer. That's what we're learning. I love it, Denise. I love that energy. I have a new goal now, right? It's perfect. The 4th piece of this, and it might not be mainly because once again, that's where audience comes into play. Knowing your audience. If I'm talking to C-suite, they already know the why, so I might not need to spend any time on it. But they might need to know the how. That might really need to be the case. So we might have to prioritize things with different audiences. And that's why when we talk about CYA, that audience is really important. The last piece of this has nothing to do with what we're doing or why we're doing or how we're doing. It's really the interpersonal application. It's who are we helping? Who are we impacting by doing so? Who is getting something better because of this? Some people are extremely interpersonal souls. They are the great rock band, The Who. This is the Ulysses of the world. I would probably take a guess and say this might be Melissa. That might be one that comes into play. That this is something to where that interpersonal impact. Look, it's like get out of my head, right? I love that, Melissa. So but it is one of those things that who are you and who are you helping by doing this? That matters to people too. So I try to build in all four of these because they all tie to thinking styles. They all tie to thinking styles. There are people that are grounded in logic, data, numbers, facts, assessment, basically on results. They are very results oriented. And so that might be where your C-suite is, and it might come off boring, but at least we know here's the results that we have. And then you have people that might be procedurally minded, as we talked about. And they're much more driven on the systems, the process, the procedure, the order of things. This is hemispherical brain thinking because this are more left brain drivers. Then you have people that are more of the creatives of the world. And I will tell you, I'm guilty of not being that person all the time. I am more left brain. Even with this charm and humor, I'm a little bit more left brain, folks. I just live in that space a little bit more. But the right brain, that when we're talking about big picture, they need to know the concept, the context, innovation. Let's take a chance. Let's try something. Let's get to the greater why. Let's get to goals and purpose. They are driven in the big picture. And then you also have people on the right side of the brain that it's not about the destination. It is about the journey. It is about the relationships. It's about people and impact and helping. So we have to make sure there's at least pieces of this that are intentionally built in. They don't have to be even in distribution. That's the other thing too. That's going to vary based on your audience. If I'm having a discussion about a need from our IT team, I'm probably going to mention a little bit on impact and big picture, but where I'm probably going to go a little bit more is in process procedure. I'm going to spend more time there, if you will, but all four will still be present. So what I'm going to share with you is a simple formula that is your Foursquare for content. Before you prepare for any meeting, I highly suggest just having a quick table of these four things that sit. Just am I checking boxes? And look, if more of the boxes are in the how or more of the boxes are in the why, that's okay. The key goal behind this is I want you to make sure that you're building something that has all four components at least sprinkled in, because then nobody gets left behind. Does that make sense to everybody? Excellent. Excellent. Very, very good. All right. Then the very last thing I'm going to teach for you all today is on-camera presence. This is so much fun to do when we teach this in managing remote and virtual teams. We teach this in a few courses, actually. Your ability to build camera presence is really effective. It's truly critical because nonverbal communication is 55% of what others receive. It's known as the 7-38-55 rule. It's the Mehrabian rule, if you will. And what that means is that out of 100% of what we share with others, only 7% received are the actual words. That's why I could say this. Ready? That's a great insight. That's a great insight. That's a great insight. Well, that was three completely different meanings. They said the same exact thing. That's why also, if you've ever misread a text or an email, it's because there isn't the 38 and the 55. The 38% is the vocality, the vocal delivery of where things are getting into. Intonation, pace, cadence, emphasis, your use of pausing in silence. That's vocal delivery. And so once again, I'll do a little social experiment. If I turn my camera off and delivered a webinar like this for 45 minutes, how many of you would fully be engaged? How many of you already want to multitask again? And we know it's not because we're looking at something beautiful here. I get it. This isn't the most beautiful thing. But the difference is that you're seeing the nonverbal communication coming through. And nonverbal communication, what I'm bringing in are things like, exactly, Courtney, we prefer to interact with a face. It's what makes us human. So things like facial expressions, things like where you're positioning your camera. I station my camera just to the right because that's where you all live whenever I'm having a meeting. I always station somebody on my second computer just off to the right. I'll tell you why I don't look at the camera. I do it in asynchronous environments, like if I'm creating a video, but when it's people involved and it's live, me talking into the camera, I'm not delivering the 5 o'clock news. Tonight at 5, find out what's happening in your neck of the woods. Like, we're not doing that. It's people. So for me, my ability to station you on camera and put you in a position allows me to connect. At the same time, what I like to do with others is I build a better presence on camera. And this is known as sort of what I'm going to teach you a couple little tips and tricks here before we get to questions. Because you make such an impression in your first 7 to 30 seconds, I've built what's called the 6 window. This is a 6 window approach. I want you to imagine your camera, it's rectangular. You have 6 windows to work with. Your head should be far enough away and not too close, right? Because you don't want to be hiding down here and away in your background, right, when you're communicating. But you also don't want to be like my grandmother going, is this thing on? Are you guys can see me? We want to make sure that spatial recognition is important in the remote environment. So your ability to create centering is critical. Eyes gravitate to screens when it happens. So your head should be in the top center. Your head should be in the top center of that window. I can't see you. How many of you are already starting to shift your bodies as you're starting to look and be like, well, where am I at? Where am I going to go? This is great. I love that. Your chest, your body should be here. The reason why it should is because when you show your body, you're actually demonstrating the lean in, which is interest, versus the sit back, which is inquisition. Questioning, understanding. So your ability to make sure your chest and your shoulders are on camera is huge because it shows posture and it shows interest. Your 4th and your 6th window should be where hands are. If I position my hands right now, look where they end up. I rest my elbows and they're here. People trust people that show their hands. So I'm not saying you have to be this wild gesticulator when you're talking, but at least if your hand is on a chin, Ulysses, you're absolutely right. If you are, your camera settings might be a little off. You might, yeah, that's a challenge. Yep. But what happens though, and I like this, Ulysses, is that some people, when they're on camera, their head is in window 5 and their chest is off screen. How many of you have seen people like that? And it's just all background, right? So that's why I'm saying your head wants to be high and your chest needs to be low, but your chest needs to be on screen. Hands are 4 and 6, because that way when you're communicating or if you're showing interest, your hand always gravitates to show interest. And they will show you that they're interested in their nonverbal communication. Then background can be in 1 and 3. So for me, I have degrees. The main reason why I have degrees is not just for branding. That's a secondary reason. For me, I'll give you a little bit of a hint. I'm 6'6" in real life. So my chances of having my head cut off, my chances, big. So I use this as a centering tool to say my body's centered in the middle degree and my head is not getting past the degree itself. This is a great question, Ulysses. Does background color matter? The answer is not quite. You just want to make sure that your lighting is clear. You want to make sure your lighting is clear. And here's what I mean by this. If you have a green background or you have an orange background, if you have a dark background, you might want to wear a colorful shirt. But what happens is this. Your lighting matters more than anything else, because watch what happens when my head, when this light comes on, look what happens to the dark side of the moon. Are you catching contrast against my face already? See how that works? Don't mind that little stuffy. That's what my little one gave me. So the other one, right? And I'm going to dive into that too, Nancy, because that's a great question. When we get to this space of lighting, you want to make sure it's off camera, but it's still on because it causes you to glow. So background color doesn't necessarily matter. All right, this is a great question. How do I feel about a blurred background at home? This is a preference. I'm going to tell you it is based on the institution and the organization. Here is my perspective. I'd rather you station your desk up, like mine is tilted outward so that the wall is behind me. Mine is tilted outward so the wall is behind me. I would rather have that than seeing, say, for instance, a bed in the background or seeing things that shouldn't maybe be there. What I do want to mention, though, is if push comes to shove, I would rather see you as a human being. So if you have your living room in the background or you have something like that and it's something that's meaningful for you, I'm okay with that to where it doesn't have to be blurred. Now, I think the environment still needs to maintain professionalism. I think it needs to maintain it has to maintain an understanding in this, right? That we are working professionals. However, I think you can station yourself with your desks and things like that you can reposition your desk and allow yourself to still have a comfortable background. That is the stance on that. Ulysses asks, and do you know what? We're already in Q&A at this point, so I love this. Let's just dive right into Q&A. This is perfect. One thing that I'm seeing is what are my feelings about folks putting cats on screen or dogs on screen? Is it a morale booster or a distraction or both? The answer here for me, Ulysses, is grace. It's grace. If somebody's cat comes across the screen, I'm not going to draw attention to it. It doesn't exist in the time speaking. However, I do know that it can be a morale booster. So I think the question becomes, what is the urgency of the dialogue? When does it occur? Because there are times to where somebody's dog, like my dog hops up like near my lap once in a while. And sometimes it's just kind of like, hey, here's my buddy, and it makes you more human. So sometimes that's a good thing, right? Peak cat times and weak cat times. I think that's a good point. I think that when you have your cat, if you have a face-to-face meeting in the office, no, but once again, Zara, this is a great point, is there's also an understanding that we are also humans in a human environment. And so when the environment changes, what level of grace do we give other people? Now, if the cat's walking across a desk and they just move out of camera, I'm not going to draw attention to it. To me, I'm not going to be overkill with that. However, if I'm watching somebody in a meeting, pulling a Dr. Evil, petting Mr. Bigglesworth the whole time during this meeting, maybe that's a discussion where we say, hey, we are having a business meeting. We might want to make sure of that. But if a cat walks across, I'm not going to draw attention to it. It's just going to be something that doesn't exist. Now, there are some times for some meetings, right? And that's the thing too, is sometimes the bosses bring in dogs. It's an office morale thing. Sometimes there are meetings where there's one-on-one space. I find that to be more beneficial in the one-on-one space, Ulysses, where when we're talking a little bit, it's like, hey, oops, sorry, my dog, he just kind of popped up really quick. And I might just be like, hey, here's my little guy, and it creates human connection. So I think there's times and places. I don't think it's this end-all be-all policy on where it sits in this. I think we have to understand the time, construct, and environment in its need. That's a fantastic question. At this point, I know we still have a couple minutes. We've already opened up the questions. You've asked amazing questions already. Other questions that we have?
We did get one question, Dr. Pugh, and please keep them coming in.
Yeah.
How do you address it when someone is visually not engaged in a virtual meeting?
This is a great question. So when somebody is not visually engaged in a meeting, what I have a tendency to find is that I try to empower, not require. What that means is I teach them the benefits of being on camera, and I try to create an open space to say, look, if you're on camera, I'm not asking you to be on camera because it's like, are you paying attention? I have that dialogue to say with them, I'm having you on camera because I know you have meaningful things to contribute. And if you have that moment of interest or that moment of thought, I want to be there for it so we can get into it because you have meaningful contributions. To me, your ability to empower is going to build better, quicker engagement than your ability to require or create compliance because of it. Do I think that we should have protocols? Yes. Standards? Yes. I will say that it is a really big thing that I think those should be shared mutual expectations. If they are your expectations you're passing down, the likelihood you're going to get compliance and not commitment is significantly higher. So it has to be shared in the protocol. That's why if I'm meeting with certain people, they know that as long as we're getting to business first, I don't care if your cat walks across the screen. But that's a mutually agreed upon outcome. Now, if you're meeting with your client, shut that down. Liliana, great question. How do you handle an audience with different priorities and values? I think what happens is you have, that's why learning their VIPs is really important, because then what I do, and we teach this in our DISC workshops, Liliana, is the platinum rule. I don't use the golden rule. I don't treat people the way I want to be treated. I treat them the way they want to be treated. However, I think it's also important to be transparent about what's important to you. So if Tiffany and I were having a meeting and she's the one requesting the meeting, my request to her would be, let's keep it brief. Let's get to brass tacks. Let's make it happen. But if I need something from Tiffany, and Tiffany's much more personable and more approachable and kind, I'm going to open up a little bit more. So the rule of thumb is A, who's doing the asking, and B, let's be transparent about what these priorities and values are so that we have much greater likelihood for common ground.
I have one last question, which I think is a good one. My team agrees with initiatives in the meeting, but then they come to me individually with questions that they didn't raise in the group. How would you handle that dynamic?
Really good question there. I think that in this case, one thing that I like to do is I like to encourage them that, hey, I think this is a great question. I think next time, please bring this up in the meeting, because this isn't something that you think may just be applying to you. Your questions really are impacting others, and we need to get that out in the open. So once again, the empowerment rule, the encouragement rule, one thing that I normally do is I ask them, and here's one of the final things too, and I know people have to go, so I'm going to make sure I respect everybody's time. I ask them not any questions. I don't say any questions, because we're guilty of that. And what you're doing is you're giving them a 50-50 chance to be compliant or to say no. What I say is, what questions, comments, thoughts do we have? And then, and I mean this with every fiber of my being, go silent for at least 20 seconds. You will create enough discomfort that people will either A, ask the question that they've been wanting to ask, or B, what they will do is they'll say, I have no questions. And then you have commitment, not compliance.
Great.
Excellent.
I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Pugh. We are right at the end of the session. Thank you to all of our attendees. You guys have been so engaging and had such great insights and questions. And be on the lookout. We'll be sending this webinar recording to the email that you use to register. Hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you all.